Thank you very much. I now yield to the gentleman from Ohio again, this time Mr. Kucinich.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Lewis, we would hope that a CEO would have both a good memory and the integrity to take responsibility for his decisions. Mr. Lewis, you stated in response to my previous question that you did not recall asking for a letter from the government stating that Bank of America was ordered to proceed with the purchase of Merrill Lynch. This is the linchpin of clarifying whether you were threatened by the Fed or whether the Fed was tough with you because you were threatening to be irresponsible. I want to direct your attention to an email response from the Fed's General Counsel to Chairman Bernanke's email, which I previously disclosed. Mr. Chairman, it says, I don't think it's necessary or appropriate for us to give Lewis a letter along the lines he asked. First, we didn't order him to go forward. We simply explained our views on what the market reaction would be and left the decision to him. Second, making hard decisions is what he gets paid for, and only he has full information needed to make the decision, so we shouldn't take him off the hook by appearing to take the decision out of his hands. I'm entering this into the record. Now,
Without objection.
Mr. Lewis, is it still your testimony that you don't recall asking for a letter to absolve you of your responsibility for acquiring Merrill Lynch's huge losses?
Congressman, what I do remember is calling Chairman Bernanke and asking him if he could give us something in writing along the lines of what the solution would be.
We're now updating Mr. Lewis's previous testimony. That may help you escape perjury, but it doesn't get away from the question of whether or not you were trying to absolve yourself of responsibility for acquiring Merrill Lynch's huge losses. I mean, we're talking about events that transpired only a few months ago. And the decision to withhold from Bank of America's shareholders material information about the deterioration of Merrill Lynch's finances was key here. This isn't about a threat. This is about your responsibility. And your failure to inform your shareholders could constitute a fundamental violation of security laws. And I've just given you documentation, Mr. Chairman, that Mr. Lewis tried to deflect the matter to the Fed by asking for a letter that they made him do it. Now, I want to ask you, Mr. Lewis, our investigation finds that Mr. Bernanke believed that your threat to invoke a MAC was not credible. I want you to take a look at the following email from Chairman Bernanke dated December 21, 2008. Quote, I think the threat to use MAC is a bargaining chip, and we don't see it as a very likely scenario at all. You did get a significant amount of financial assistance when you dropped the threat to back out of your deal. Isn't that true?
Yes, we did.
Tell the committee what you received. How much money?
$20 billion.
And you got the promise of $118 billion, didn't you? In asset protection for a combination of Merrill and Bank of America toxic assets. Didn't you get that?
We didn't. We hadn't settled on an amount until sometime, but the wrap was being considered. Yes.
Now that was in addition to the $15 billion in TARP monies you received directly in October, $10 billion in TARP monies you received upon acquiring Merrill. Isn't that right?
We did not ever sign the agreement on the wrap.
Now our investigation also finds that contrary to your representations to the Fed, that you were concerned primarily about the losses at Merrill Lynch. Merrill's losses were less than half of the problem you faced. Losses originating at Bank of America itself were larger than the losses at Merrill. Mr. Lewis, please look at the following email, dated December 18, 2008, between officials at the New York Fed. One reports his findings saying that on a total of 30 basis points deterioration of the tangible common equity ratio of the combined Bank of America Merrill Lynch entity, they go on to say that 16 basis points of deterioration is due to Bank of America, 14 basis points due to Merrill Lynch. The other official described this discovery as a smoking gun. Isn't it true that more than half of the decline in your all-important tangible common equity ratio evident in mid-December was not caused by Merrill Lynch?
Your apples and oranges. The securities.
Well, maybe it's rotten apples and rotten apples, because isn't it true that you were told that if you went through with the MAC and if you later needed financial assistance from the government, you wouldn't get it? Isn't that true?
I'm sorry, repeat that, please.
That if you went through with the MAC and if you later needed financial assistance from the government, weren't you told you wouldn't get it?
I think I have seen that in an email, but I don't.
Were you told that, yes or no?
I do not recall being told that.
Isn't it true that given the precarious state of your balance sheet and especially your inadequate levels of tangible common equity, you believed at the time you could reasonably could need financial assistance from the government in the future?
The preferred stock does nothing to help your tangible common equity ratio.
Now, you wouldn't think about it? I mean, if you got $15 billion in October, and you got to come back 2 months later and ask for another $20 billion, got 15, and then 2 months later $20 billion, doesn't it show that doesn't that show that it really increased your Tier 1 capital ratio? Doesn't it show that?
Not tangible.
Tier 1.
Tier 1, yes.
Now, Mr. Lewis, the government believed that you knew or should have known about the Merrill losses long before you said you did, based on data that Bank of America possessed and had reasonably reviewed. The government believed you could be in breach of security laws. The government didn't believe you that Merrill was the primary cause of your problems, but thought that Merrill losses were less significant than the losses that Bank of America was experiencing as a stand-alone entity. The government even thought that you were making the threat to use MAC as a bargaining chip, and that it was not credible. The government had already given you $25 billion before you approached it about Merrill Lynch. If the government believed all of that about you and your management team, were you surprised that the Fed arranged for you to receive considerable additional financial support in January? Did that surprise you?
We received $15 billion, not $25 billion, from the original TARP package. It did not surprise me they were willing to give us more because we had talked about coming to a solution to get the Merrill Lynch deal done.
Well, there was a financial crisis, and they thought it was necessary for this unanimous consent for 2 more minutes, and then I should wrap it up.
Without objection.
There was a financial crisis, and they thought it was necessary for the system, for the deal to go through. If there's one thing about your record that's clear, it is that you have experience negotiating deals. What do you believe your leverage with the government was at the end of 2008?
The only leverage I would say we had was that 2 honorable people trying to come to the right solution had given me their word that they would try their best to find a solution.
Isn't it true that it was because Bank of America is a big bank, and if you hadn't been the CEO of the largest bank in America, if you'd been the top executive, let's say, at a mid-sized or small regional bank, and you'd been acquiring another similarly sized bank during the fall of 2008, you think the federal regulator would have behaved in the same way?
Well, sir, I don't think I was such a favorite son from some of the memos that or the emails that you've just read.
Well, wouldn't you have, if you were a smaller institution, been taken over and liquidated?
I can't speculate on that, sir.
It's fair to say we have a large financial institution, Mr. Chairman, that doesn't face the same consequences for management of small ones, and the Fed had an opinion that there was considerable evidence of mismanagement. And, you know, there's been a misconception here that the government put a gun to the head of Bank of America when it's quite possible that it was the Bank of America that put a gun to the head of the Fed by threatening to invoke the MAC. And I think that this whole idea, Mr. Chairman, about Mr. Lewis somehow being a victim here flies in the face of the fact that you were CEO of the largest bank and that you are pretending that you didn't ask for help from the government to take the burden off your back, that you didn't ask for a letter. You're going to have to excuse me, but this is not credible. You're trying to change the scenario from you as a victim to you as a powerful CEO who made a decision that denied your stockholders, your shareholders, material information that they needed prior to a vote on a merger. And I think that is the central point of this hearing, and I'm sorry that you haven't been forthcoming enough about that central point. Yield back.
Well, one thing for sure, there was a